Welcome one more day to an harmony. And since we are still immersed in winter, at the bottom of the astral wheel, the so-called moon of Capricorn, it seems appropriate to clarify where the false wisdom of the serpent comes from and how it dominates the entire world by means of hypnotic hallucinations. Because this is what makes us perceive delusions of all kinds and the desire to be better, to choose between good and bad, all of which takes us out from our true center of being, the serene being of light which is connected to the source of primordial life. And sometimes the false wisdom gives rise to spiritual arts based on raising the so-called vital energy, the kundalini, from the bottom of the spine upwards, to form subtle bodies and turn people into anointed ones, messiahs, Christs, but usually disconnected from life. This is the problem, as we will see. And on the other hand, the collective hallucination also generates conventional politics and religion based on domination by means of promoting a hypnotic worship of astral forces, the demiurge god, which I call the father-stepmother of this fallen universe, which is the greatest quantum lie ever seen. So first of all, let's see that when consciousness and life get disconnected from the original source, from the universal mind or father of lights, if you will, consciousness and life become contrary to the true loving life. And this is what happened during the fall of the first architects, whose wisdom is mentioned in Proverbs 9. Wisdom built up her house, raised her 7 pillars, killed her victims, mixed her wine. I have seen the adversary Satan fall like a lightning from heaven, said Master Yeshua. Interestingly, in mythology, the instrument of Zeus is always a thunderbolt, a lightning, which represents astral intelligence. From Zeus precisely comes the word Deus in Latin, Dios in Spanish, God in English. And the offspring between the brother of Zeus, which is Poseidon, and Gaia, the earth, is represented with beings that have tails of dragon or serpent, such as Charybdis or Triton. And this is because the demiurge architects are draconian entities. It is no accident that in the book of Revelation we hear that there is a dragon who is the father of lies. And from his genetic experiments came several races, including the serpentoid humanoids known as the beast and the serpent, whose line spirit is the false prophet. So the dragon, beast, and false prophet mentioned in the book of Revelation are the unholy trinity, so to say. Curiously, Ezekiel only mentions 4 cherubim, symbolized by the bull, the lion, the eagle, and man, as you know. And there we find missing the reptilian amphibian races, so this might be regarded as the 5th cherub. Ezekiel 28 speaks precisely of the anointed cherub that fell, and all because the dragon tail dragged a third of the stars, as we read in Revelation. So it's logical to think that the fallen ones were the serpentoid beings designed by the fallen architects, and they came to receive Adamic intelligence as well, as we will see. This is why their fallen nature deceived the light of Adam within them, making the soul eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad, the tree of knowledge which were those weird creatures. And the link between the beast and humankind is found in Revelation 13, which says that it is not possible to buy or sell without the mark or number of the beast, 666, which is the number of man. Not by chance we are physically composed of carbon-12 mostly, whose atoms have 6 protons, 6 electrons, and 6 neutrons. And from the constriction of matter come the contracts with the laws of dense matter. Therefore, if we receive something in the flesh, we also must pay debt. And we also know that getting too much pleasure in the flesh eventually makes us pay with pain and death. So it is necessary to see the process of how a being of light becomes entangled. And this is something which is told in ancient myths. Notice how interesting is what an ancient alchemist known as Zosimus of Panoplis wrote almost 2000 years ago in one of his writings called Letter Omega. He says, "The atom of flesh is called Thoth, with respect to the visible outer mold, but the human within him, the man of spirit, has a proper name as well as a common one. And when the Phos, the man of light, was in the Garden of Eden, spirited along by the winds, at the instigation of fate they persuaded him, since he was innocent and unactivated, to clothe himself with their Adam, who comes from fate, who comes from the 4 elements. But Phos, the man of light, for his innocence, did not refuse, and they began to exult to think that he had been made their slave. Hesiod called the outer man fetter, with which Zeus bound Prometheus. Then, after this fetter, Zeus set yet another fetter upon him, Pandora, whom the Hebrews call Eve. For Prometheus and Epimetheus are, by the allegorical method, a single man, that is, soul and body. And so Prometheus sometimes takes the form of soul, sometimes that of mind, and sometimes that of flesh, because of Epimetheus' disregard when he disregarded the advice of Prometheus, his own foresight. For our mind says, the Son of God, being capable of everything, and becoming everything, when he wills and as he pleases, appears to each. Now let's clarify here that such a divine Son is not connected to the primordial Father, the primordial mind, but to the Father Zeus, the astral light, the God of this world, which is dual. And the whole process of fall is also explained in Genesis 2. It says that the soul, Adam, gave name to all the creatures of Adamah that were brought to the soul. And obviously, many of Adamah's creatures received Adam's name because conscious thought arose in them. And the same alchemist, Zosimus of Panoplis, said in the mentioned writing that in the original hieratic language, the Egyptian hieroglyphs, the first man, interpreter of everything that exists, and giver of names for all corporeal beings, was designated as Thoth, and he was known as Adam among the Hebrews. Interestingly, Thoth resembles thought in English, so these creatures could think even though they had animalistic characteristics. In other words, the divine Son who impregnated some creatures of Adamah was the intellectual astral consciousness, the neshama, that was provided by the astral architects, according to Genesis 2. And the story says that Adam did not find a contrary helpmate, so we can deduce that the soul did not anoint the humanoid creatures very well. In Hebrew wisdom it is said that Adam did not know his female side or body very well. Adam and Eve did not know each other. They were back to back. And this is the reason why the soul was put to sleep by the natural forces, Elohim. And they divided the soul into man and woman, masculine and feminine side. Then the astral consciousness The masculine side recognized that feminine part, which was the mental, emotional body, the woman. This is flesh of my flesh and bones of my bones. However, the woman, being a slower type of thought, a more emotional thought, heard with more intensity the voice of the serpent. And most people think that the serpent was a separate entity. But that's thinking like Eve, because actually in the tale, she accuses the serpent of making her eat from the tree of knowledge, of good and bad, and then the man accuses the woman, so none of them assumes responsibility. And this is immaturity. They were unaware of the source and unaware of the different dimensions within themselves. Even the Hebrew Kabbalists know that the serpent is rather the passionate intellect of the material body, which divides into good and bad, the mind of the beast that establishes contracts with this dual world for reasons that we will see later. And to be more exact, the low vibration of the serpent encourages the crystallization of an astral spirit that becomes sort of a negative personality separated from the source of life. And this is the fallen Eve. And when these spirits become disembodied, they are seen as demonic personalities that literally attack humanity. They try to possess. And this was the origin of male evil spirits. The chief of them all would be Samael, even though that name is not pronounced by Kabbalists, only for didactic purposes. And his female side would be Lilith, a famous demoness from the ancient world. Now, the potential for the fall was already within the soul Adam, the vital soul, because in Genesis 2 it is said that the Adamic soul was formed from the dust of Adamah, a dimension of astral formation. And the dust indicates that these were residues of chaos because of the fall of the universe. So that spiritual Adam received the inclination to the positive side, known as YETZER HATOB, and the inclination to the negative side, YETZER HARA. And in Genesis 3, it is clarified that the serpent was not formed but made in the dimension of Asiya, the world of action, the actualization of actions. And obviously, the serpent was made by the architects from the left side in order to activate the passions in some creature and force the Adamic light to refine the energy, because the architects want high quality energy, and this involves inner work. Adam was meant to till the land. And this clarifies somehow what I already said in the episode Unveiling the Garden of Eden. And notice that since the time when the soul of humanity was split and put under the influence of the serpent, humanity has been forced to decide, to choose between opposite poles, which is the source of all problems. Some say free will is a divine gift, but this is problematic, because the same act of saying, "Do not eat from the tree of knowledge of good and bad," which is in the middle of the garden, is already an action of the dual mind, which is what causes the fall. And of course, this mind was infused by the external God, the draconian architects, who breathe their dual mind into the soul of humanity. And I'm not accusing anyone, I'm just showing a fact. Now, it's important to see that a luminous humanity fell in spite of being anointed with divine light, so to say. And this is told in Ezekiel 28, which speaks of the anointed cherub who was in Eden, who had beauty and intelligence, but he was carried away by his crooked wisdom because of the multitude of his trading. And that is buying and selling, establishing contracts with matter, the mark of the beast. Those Adamic beings, in my view, wanted to imitate the architects forming their own separate upper bodies, subtle bodies, in order to free themselves from the yoke, from the payment that they had to establish, energy payment, the tikkun, the repair of chaos. Their serpent intelligence told them, if you mix with the dual world and establishes certain contracts by means of spiritual techniques or whatever, you will acquire wisdom and you will become like the Elohim. That's the idea. Because all this reminds me of the Sumerian myths. In the story of Atrahasis, the Gigi gods, which were the first godly humans, so to say, became tired of working on the earth, working for the higher gods. And then Enki, which is the serpent mind, suggested making a slave prototype by mixing their own genome with that of the earth, creatures of the earth. And this is why in former times our humanity was regarded as the dust of the gods. We are a residue, what they did. You are gods, but die as humans, says in Psalm 82. And this means those first Luciferic humans wanted to sit on the throne of astral forces, which were the oppressive Elohim, and become somehow like them, playing to be gods. And that's why in myths they always fight against them. Baal, Lord Ba, or mental body, fights against Elohim, always to gain modern humanity for himself. And Prometheus fights against Zeus for the same purpose. And the wisdom of the serpent always tries to defeat astral intelligences by transforming dense energy into subtle energies, but forgetting the most important key, which is the connection with the original source. As we have already seen, Nahash, serpent, has a geometric value of 358, just as Mashiach, anointed one, which means understanding, the understanding of the Neshama, the intellectual consciousness. However, notice that there are two types of consciousness, two Neshamas. Obviously, the first humanity was a type of Messiah, as Paul said in Romans 5 and Ezekiel 28. But they didn't have the spirit of life manifested by Yeshua, for instance. The Master had the liberated Neshama, the free soul consciousness, not simply the planetary astral consciousness breathed by the architects. The Master embodied a prototype of universal Messiah, which is emanation of the Father's self-conscience, which never falls. And myths all over the world acknowledge that what fell was the astral soul of humanity, which was dismembered. This is why we hear that Osiris was cut into 14 pieces, pieces which are linked to the zodiacal wheel. And we also hear that Adam burst into sparks, according to the Kabbalists, and his soul became split into mind, body, emotions. And this is how those soul parts began to attach to human personalities, perpetuating the spirit of the fall. The sons of Elohim saw that the daughters of Adam were beautiful and bore them fallen ones, Nephilim. We read in Genesis 6. And through all kinds of theologies and spiritual technologies, they tried to elevate themselves back into the Garden of Eden, raising their own towers of Babel, which means confusion. And when read backwards, it gives LEBAB, heart. However, the astral forces, the adversary dragon, threw them down with planetary catastrophes, establishing also religions. And what characterizes all those fallen wisdoms is that they operate from bottom up by means of establishing contracts, as I said. A well-known one is the resurrection of Osiris, the resurrection of first Adam, by means of transforming the energy of the serpent into subtle bodies in order to make them independent from the architects, from everything. And to understand this, we must see that the energy of the serpent is the energy of life that gets somehow distorted and trapped first as sexual energy in the sexual center, for instance, and from there it must be transformed or sublimated and crystallized into bodies of light, astral bodies, which can turn into crooked spirits, twisted spirits. And the great problem of this serpent energy or kundalini is that it develops psychic imagination, which is very difficult to control. One can have a strong astral body with mental powers, but be completely unenlightened, disconnected from the source. And these mental powers are often used to control and harm others, as sorcerers or priests do in religion, especially by means of repetitive prayers, symbolic blood covenants, or real blood covenants, and thus they establish contracts with fallen entities. And by using repetitive prayers, they can literally project psychic energy and convince others or intimidate others. Therefore, Kundalini energy, vital psychic energy, is very problematic on its own, disconnected from the source. Remember, for instance, the episode when the Israelites were bitten by snakes in the desert. And this was precisely because their astral bodies crystallized with pride and caused them lots of suffering. This is why they complain so much. And then Moses made a brazen serpent and put it on a pole. This was to remind them of what was hurting them. Bronze is an alloy, it is not a pure metal like pure gold. But eventually, as we know, they ended up worshipping the brazen serpent, calling it Nehushtan, as told in 2 Kings 18. And the same thing happened in Egypt and in India with the Kundalini cult and so on. The truth is that from ancient times, different types of meditation techniques have been developed in order to raise the vital energy through the 7 centers, opening the 7 seals, as stated in the book of Revelation, which says that the Lion of Judah, which is the heart intelligence, opens the book and its 7 seals, even though it's the book of light, the Sefer, the energy configuration that we have. And it's true we have to cancel all the blockages, but there are different ways of doing that, as we are going to see. Notice how the energy goes from the sacrum bone, the bottom of the spine, crossing all the centers, to anoint the brain, which certainly secretes a special oil known as CHRISMA in Greek, SHEMEN in Hebrew. And this is a mixture of substances called the milk and honey of the promised land, as told in the scripture. And both are emanated by the pineal gland and the pituitary gland. This explains why when Jacob defeated the inner man, his inner bestial ego, he called the place Peniel, which means face of El. Jacob saw the light face to face, with his pineal gland, his third eye, even though it might be astral light. And that is why he was called Israel, conqueror of Isis or lunar forces, Ra, solar forces, by means of YASHAR, El, which means effort towards El, planetary forces, to manifest the mercy. El is a name associated to Chesed, the sphere in the tree of life known as mercy. And we can also say that we need effort in order to understand and manifest the maximum will, but that's even a further step, which was manifested by Master Yeshua. Coincidentally, in the Gospels it is said that the Messiah, was 33 years old at the time of his torment, and he fell 3 times in his ascent to Golgota, which is an Aramaic word symbolizing the head. And precisely the vital energy ascends through 33 vertebrae and falls into 3 points. The first one, obviously, is the sacrum bone area, the sexual area, because energy is usually wasted with incorrect sexuality. Then we have the lower back at the height of the solar plexus, because negative emotions also deplete vital energy. And then we have the neck, which establishes the connection between the head and the trunk, because the interruption of consciousness due to lack of mind-body connection also depletes energy. So whoever wrote the Gospels knew very well the wisdom of the serpent. And all this was known in ancient Egypt and other places. Actually, the Nile Delta itself, near the 3 great pyramids, symbolized the spot where the vital energy rises, generating the brain illumination. Curiously, the book of Revelation says that the Christ was crucified in Sodom and Egypt as well, symbolizing 2 of the spots where energy falls. However, I doubt Yeshua focused specifically on that Egyptian or Indian religion, since he worked more from the being of true light, uncovering all deceptions, unlocking all the seals, obviously, as the Lion of Judah, but harmonizing subtle bodies from a loving life and serene light, without the rituals of pagan religion, which are contracts with matter, as did the fallen ones. And he stated, "The Son of Man will be raised as the serpent in the desert." Yet the way of harmonization is not Kundalini worship, but rather focus on our sonship, so to say. He who in conscience acknowledges himself or herself as son, emanation of the primordial Father, the universal mind, abandons all religions, all contracts, and lives as an emanation of divine mind, regaining the original image of true being. So this doesn't require religious satanic procedures which separate a Lord God from his creatures, faithful ones from unfaithful ones. And it doesn't require Luciferic techniques that fight against astral forces, because that's what the old heroes and messiahs did, and it never worked. In my view, the spirits of fallen Adamic beings have always wanted to perpetuate their spirit in humanity as false messiahs. And that is why many ancestral religions speak of anointed kings, symbolized by Horus, Mithras, Christos, Serapis, and they were always seen as reincarnation of Osiris, Tammuz, which were all allusions to the fallen Adamic races. Sadly, in order to hide this powerful truth, which was exposed by Yeshua and the revolutionary action of his first followers, a new religion was concocted, and this was Roman Christianity, which mixes different types of pagan religion and Judaism, and this eventually forced the rise of Islam and also the New Age, because very few were uncovering the truths. So people decided to choose contracts with matter. And it's also very tragical that due to the great ignorance that has been generated on this planet, many neo-Christians today do not wonder why there is an obelisk or phallus of Osiris in the middle of St. Peter's Square at the Vatican, the square which symbolizes the vulva of Isis, the natural stepmother, or Mariam Bitter Waters, which gives birth to anointed ones, false messiahs, Horus. the Egyptian Christs, the Babylonian Christs. And this sexual symbology is found in many religions, including Islam, whose cube or Kaaba, center of worship, has another vulva. You can check it. And for now, I will leave this as an article in the blog. If you found the information inspiring, please give thumbs up to promote the video and the channel in YouTube. Thank you very much for listening. And let's remember that the mental duality which traps us and forces us to establish contracts with fallen matter, fallen nature, can only be cancelled by remembering, acknowledging our connection with unconditional law, the pure life and modified life, which makes us very vital, the pure conscience, which does not choose between good and bad, because the being of light is perfect right now, and overcomes all lies, helping us feel the blissful serenity of the Holy One, here and now.